The Catholic Church has never and will never hold any doctrine that contradicts science. Both the belief of faith and reason reach the same objective truth. Concerning biological evolution, the Church does not have an official position on whether various life forms developed over the course of time. However, it is said that if they did develop, then they did so under the guidance of God, and their ultimate creation must be ascribed to Him. Concerning human evolution, the Church has a more definite teaching. It allows for the possibility that man's body developed from previous biological forms under God's guidance, but it is insisted on the special creation of his soul. So whether the human body was specially created or developed, we are required to hold as a matter of Catholic faith that the human soul is specially created. It did not involve and it is not inherited from our parents as our bodies are.
We do not understand Genesis as a newspaper account. And just like any newspaper account, when you are reading something from the newspaper, you get the information and you move on. But Genesis to us is not a newspaper account. What it is an account as we can understand it that tells us deep theological truths, deep wisdom in light of giving us an understanding about creation. But it doesn't mean that this is an eyewitness account of how the world was created. In other words, do we as Catholics believe that the only thing we can think is that the world was made in 6 days? No, that has never been our understanding, that we believe in creation in light of how God created the world, and we know that God does not limit himself in any way. So is it possible it took more than 6 days? Is it possible it took millions of years for the creation of the world? Oh, absolutely. But how do we communicate that message to others? Well, one of the things that God can say to us is he can say, let's look at it within an allegory. In 6 days I created the world. If we look at that as a newspaper account, then we say the world was made in 6 days and move on. But in fact, the creation stories in Genesis have deep, profound theological truths attached to them.
John D. Miller talks about the acceptance of evolution, saying, Catholics and mainstream Protestants generally accept variations of a theological view known as theistic evolution, which views evolution as the means by which God brought humans as well as other organisms, but then says that this is problematic because it implies a more distant or less personal God.
Many Catholics are actually somewhat confused about evolution, and when I've sort of asked in a non-scientific sampling, most Catholics think, well, the Church has no problem with evolution. I remember something that Pope John Paul said in the 1990s, and that's really enough for them. More sort of careful studying type people realize that there's some kind of problem, but they often don't actually know what the Church's official position is. If you read the official literature, though, you read Pope Pius XII's encyclical from 1950, for instance, and theological commissions that have talked about evolution, it's clear that from the beginning, the Church has had serious concerns about Darwinian evolution, and that's the important distinction. We can't just talk about evolution vaguely, as if we're talking about the age of the universe or change over time. It's the specifically Darwinian claim of random genetic mutations and natural selection. So a purposeless and unguided process, as it's normally defined. That's always been a problem for the Church. In fact, the Church explicitly says that's not the sort of thing we can believe. Catholics are free to entertain certainly various hypotheses about evolution, cosmic evolution, the idea that organisms share a common ancestor, but there's key Catholic claims that contradict with any kind of materialistic theory of evolution. First of all, that God had a specific plan and purpose in mind, not just for us, but for everyone. That God in some way specially acted in the creation of Adam and Eve, that all human beings are the descendants of Adam and Eve, who themselves freely sinned and fell from an original innocent state. Those are key Catholic doctrines, and any theory of evolution that contradicts that is going to be a theory of evolution that's contrary to the Catholic faith. That's what the Church teaches. It's unfortunate that people don't know that more widely, but if you really study the issue, the Church's counsel is actually quite clear.
Pope Pius XII directly addressed the evolution issue in 1950. The document he wrote was published that he thought that evolution would just be a passing scientific fad, and that it attacked those persons who imprudently and indiscreetly hold that evolution explains the origin of all things. The Pope then declared, "The teaching authority of the Church does not forbid that, in conformity with the present state of the human sciences and sacred theology, research and discussions on the part of the men experiences in both fields take place with regard to the doctrine of evolution, in as far as it inquires into the origin of the human body as coming from pre-existent and living matter, for the Catholic faith obliges us to hold that souls are immediately created by God."